Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I guess it's probably afternoon for anyone on the East Coast and morning anybody back across the country. Um, as Rita said, we're going to talk to you today about designing inclusive and impactful websites for nonprofits or just websites in general, and talk about some changes we've seen, especially even over the last few years or a few months, and then years with as things come up with like AI and some different capabilities that are out there. We've got a quick little overview slide for how to participate. You'll see there's a chat if you want to participate in the discussion. A lot of you have already done that already. Please save the Q&A or put the Q&A in the with the Q using the Q&A tool. That way we can kind of track what questions were asked. It's kind of like the chat will start to get pretty busy, and we've got a couple people on the team managing that chat and like answering some questions in there. But if you want me to answer that stuff live, it'll be easier to do it in that format. And if you do want to have closed captions on, you can turn that on, and they'll give you a live transcript of the call or the conversation today. Quick background or agenda for us to go through. So we're going to go through who we are, who TAP is, what accessibility is, and what specifically for web accessibility, why it matters, and why it matters so much more now. Some common tools that you can use, some solutions we can help put in place, and then we'll like I said, save some time for Q&A at the end. We should be able to get through this pretty quickly. Quick disclaimer for this. This is definitely not legal advice. These are some just like kind of best practices, tips and tricks. This stuff is always changing. There are like government requirements coming down already this year for government organizations, state organizations, and things like that that are changes to some of the ADA compliance and accessibility compliance things for those organizations, and I'm sure for you all as well as the web in general. Who's on the call today, you'll hear from myself. I'm the co-founder of a company called Tap Network. We are agency for TechSoup, so a lot of the content and emails and web pages and things like that you see through TechSoup, something that we've either helped build, designed ourselves, or helped implement over the last more than 10 years now. We are a digital transformation agency focused on growth in the nonprofit and mission-driven space. We work with organizations of all sizes across the country and across the globe. I'm joined today by Jason Spangler, who's our Director of Business Development. We have people working at TAP across the country, actually around the world, in I think 6 or 7 different countries and in 13 or 14 different states. Jason happens to live around the corner from me, and his mom was my kindergarten teacher. So small world. I gave you kind of quick background on TAP, just solving some of the problems that we solve. We look at how we can help accelerate nonprofits and governments to help keep up with the larger ecosystem, to be able to compete with the for-profit organizations, the big businesses who are vying for the same eyeballs, looking at the same people, and to cut down on some of that distraction. We do this because we want, it's more about driving innovation. It's about us, creating change, creating impactful change, and it helps. I really feel like it helps us feel like we're doing something good. We're able to give back, and I certainly sleep better at night because of it. And we do this by innovating through how we innovate through impact. We use AI-enabled technology. Obviously our team and our background here, who has an abundance of experience across the whole ecosystem, and then working with partners like TechSoup to drive that impact and change. As I said, we work globally, so it's not just nonprofits, it's not just small and mid-sized businesses. We work with multi-billion and trillion-dollar industries, but we also, as I said, we take that back and we work with the community-driven organizations like yourselves on this call today, and then some of the people that will be listening to this on the recording. How we can help. I'm not going to read every one of these slides. You can see this. This slide deck will be shared. You'll have links in this. You can also just go to TechSoup's website. If you pull into the drop downs for for services, for digital marketing, for web development, or for AI, that's all going to be our services. So everything from strategy, branding, to planning, implementing, building on AI platforms and tools, all the way down to like the more common marketing type things. If it's digital, we do it. So quick poll question. You can answer this in the chat. It'll allow us all to see what everybody else says. How important do you think website accessibility is for your nonprofit organization? So A, very important. You have to do it for ensuring equal access to information and services. B, somewhat important. Or B, important. C, somewhat important. Or D, not important at all. It's not really a significant concern because for your organization at the time, we always get a lot of people, thankfully, that say A, and am inclined to agree. We'll go through that today. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, like most people said, hey, a couple B's, a couple C's in there, and that's what we're here to cover today to kind of highlight like to that specific point. If it's not the primary concern in your organization, where that kind of lies and how we can help, make sure that we are creating inclusive experiences for people. So quick introduction to accessibility, why it matters. Some of these stats are going to be updated this year. I know we've seen some new studies come out of this for how it relates to engagement, and I'm going to give some examples and some anecdotes throughout that I don't have like images for. But 1 in 4 Americans has some type of disability. So is either has a defined disability, or they have something that might impact them from experiencing the way that someone without that same disability would. According to NTEN in 2023, organizations that built accessible websites saw 1/3 higher online engagement from all users, and I know that one of those numbers I've seen has changed recently. That number has gone up as the need for accessibility is increased. You can certainly reach a wider audience and better serve your community. And a lot of times, thinking in the nonprofit space, there are many nonprofits who work almost primarily with disabled audiences as well. So this might be even more specific to you all. And besides there is a legal requirement for this, but besides it being a legal requirement, there's like this moral imperative, obviously, for nonprofits to do good and to serve the community at large. So a quick background on some of the guidelines. You'll see some of these abbreviations as you go through this. There's ADA. There's specifically to web, there's WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and then that was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, which is W3C. These are the standards that you'll commonly hear applied to. This is where you can go. There's links again in this deck that will take you to those standards, those links. But this really provides that framework for creating those experiences. It gives you like the techniques and best practices for different levels there's different levels and different grades, so to speak. So there's like 2.1 AA, 2.1 AAA, things like that, that you might be required to meet or that you can just strive to meet as well. And then it gives you like a litmus test for what to check for, so you can make sure that your content, your website, the user experience is accessible to all users, regardless of any disability they might have. But it's also one thing, like the last point on this slide is one of my, I think, the most important ones that goes through this. It's not just about like making it accessible for people that have an accessibility need. It's also just it just leads to a better user experience. So the sites that are more accessible will lead to a better user experience. It'll be easier for people that might not have a visual impairment. That'll be easier for them to read because the contrast is better, or because the way that the website is laid out is better. It'll be easier for people who are visiting from a mobile device to have better touch points and things like that to make it more interactive. So you will see an increase in just general overall user experience if you follow some of these guidelines. The guidelines follow this acronym POUR. So things that all the principles in WCAG need to be perceivable, which means the user, it's presentable to a user in a way that they can perceive. So, if there's a visual impairment, they need to be able to listen to the site. So if there's or if they have an audio impairment, they need to be able to to read the text on the site. So they need to be able to perceive that as well. It needs to be operable, which means that they need to be able to navigate through the site as well. So like in the point I just made about mobile devices, like people being able to scroll on a screen, things like that, like having larger buttons to touch on. Maybe that's because there is a visual thing where it's harder for them to see what that little link is or click on that little thing. But it also means that if you are navigating a page either with a screen reader or with buttons on a keyboard, you're able to navigate through the whole site just like someone who was able to use a mouse or interact with a touchscreen would be able to. It needs to be understandable, which means that the way that someone uses it, like this is where user experience really comes into play. It needs to be kind of like common sense for how to use something. So we always say, don't make people work. Don't make someone follow a bunch of clicks to get to one answer, or like have to click through a bunch of things, or expand a bunch of stuff to get to the content they want, especially when it comes to, for accessibility. And then they want it to be robust, so it needs to be able to be interpreted by the same way by a different user agents, like on different screens, or different technologies, or just different people in general. So like the message should be clear, and the way that someone engages with that message should also be clear. Some common challenges I realized as I'm going through this, like I think last time we did this, I had someone else going through these slides with me, so it's gonna be a lot of me talking today as I'm thinking through this. But some common challenges, and I'll give some examples as we go through this. So lack of alt text. Alt text is the text that appears behind an image. If you've ever opened up a screen and you've seen like a space where an image should be, and it says like image 12345 dot JPG, that's because that person didn't add alt text. And that example is why alt text is so important, because someone who is using a screen reader is going to be browsing that page, and they're going to come across a picture that's in the middle of the page, and there's a bunch of great copy above it, a bunch of great copy below it, but that image just says image 1234.jpg. They have no idea what it's supposed to be. It might be an important image with like words and content and stuff like that in it that really helps set the tone of the page. It might also be like an impactful image that's supposed to be used to like drive emotion out of someone. But if you're not describing what's in that image, or you don't talk about, or you don't give the text that's in that image behind it, the person's not going to know what that is. Color contrast is probably one of the biggest ones we see, one of the biggest violators we see across many websites, is making sure that there's the right contrast ratio for either headings or text, or text over images. And we have all those standards in this presentation. But having that wrong color contrast ratio can make it hard or impossible for people to read. Some people can't see shades. Some people can't see the same color. Some people have a problem with just contrast in general. So if you have, bad contrast, you can certainly alienate visitors, but you also might have people where they're straining to see things, and you don't want that to be the case. Not going to read through this whole slide, but to that same point, insufficient text size and formatting options. So having text that's too small, and also having text over images is where it's part of the image. Where if you think about that, like you resize a screen, or the image resizes, so the text becomes not legible. Thinking of things like that is what are going to make it harder for people to engage with your site. So using text and making sure text can be resized. So a lot of sites you'll go on, you'll see like there's like three A's at the top. Usually it'll be like different font sizes. You can increase the size, but you can also just hit the zoom in, zoom out. If you don't have the text size correctly, when people zoom in and zoom out, the text will always stay the same size, and everything else around it will get bigger. It'll still be illegible text. So just being clear on that. To that point, some practical tips, things you guys can implement right away, as well as think of when you are designing these sites or working on a redesign. But first, this next poll question here for you all. Which feature do you find most challenging to implement in your website? So some of the ones we just talked through. Text alternatives for images, so the alt text, keyboard accessibility, so making sure people can browse with a keyboard, color contrast, or making sure you have the right heading structures. D and C. Great, cool. So some people, like, I think I won't say they cheated, but I think they see what I'm going for here. Like some of this stuff is a little might seem a little bit more obvious, like text alternatives. You can kind of do that easy. It's sort of easy to follow. There's plugins and things that like on different sites will actually add some of that stuff for you. So that might be a challenge, but something that's pretty easy to overcome. Same with color contrast, like, small changes on a site can make the color contrast fit. Key B and D are the ones that I think are probably more commonly actually challenging to people. So make sure that the website is accessible through a keyboard, especially forms. So, those are some things that take a little bit more kind of manual input and more planning around when you're building sites out. And that leads into the heading structure as well. So a lot of sites you'll go to and you'll see like it looks good, like it looks like, hey, here's the title of the page, here's a subheading, here's something below that, but they're using the wrong heading tags. They're not using like title H1, H2, H3, H4, and like paragraph tags, and things are getting mixed in. And what that causes a lot of challenges, one for keyboard accessibility, but also just general like screen reader accessibility, because that's how the page navigates to someone. So they know this is the main point of the page, this is what's like a sub point, and here's what's supporting content below that. And if that's out of order, it'll really throw off how someone engages with that site. So that point, accessibility is not a feature. This is something that we say often. A lot of times you'll hear, I mean, you'll hear this a lot. The idea is not treating accessibility like it's a bonus thing you add to something. It's really something that's going to require a lot of thought, a lot of empathy, and understanding of what's needed in general, but also who your audience typically would be and who you're trying to reach. So, you might not be able to check all the boxes as it comes to accessibility, but you certainly want to make sure you check the ones for your specific audiences. But the goal is, if you design it that way, you don't have to redesign or re-architect your site in the future. So you don't have to build a big, beautiful site that looks great and you think it works really well and your board loves it. And then you find out like it doesn't work for your audience. It's not accessible. And you have to like kind of re-architect and rebuild it. If you start with it in the planning phases and take that approach, you won't have to come back and do that. And it has, AI engines now too, but like Google, like the common search engines, and different tools give preference to the accessible sites. So it'll have SEO, search engine optimization impact. It'll have performance and user experience impacts as well, as we touched on earlier. Just making something accessible, make it generally better for every user, not just the users that need the accessible piece of it. And then when it comes to accessibility, I saw someone said they have trouble with like PDFs in the chat. It's also about thinking about beyond the website. So thinking about how that accessibility matters on, banner ads that you or the banners that you guys put up, like, in public, or like flyers that you put up, or things you give out at an event, or, posters and things like that, how it has an impact on what a t-shirt looks like on someone. So accessibility is not just on the web, it really is, kind of all around us. Some tips to get your website to be more accessible, or just get your web assets to be more accessible. One thing is using what are called semantic HTML elements to provide, it says clear and structured layout. That's the headings and things like that. So make sure we have the proper H1, H2, H3 tags. It's also using like schema.org markup. A lot of common content management systems like WordPress and things like that will either have plugins or it'll be in the theme. Or if you're working with an agency or a developer, you can work with them to make sure that the HTML is optimized for accessibility. Checking for color contrast, so in the design phase, but also when people are editing your website, if you have multiple people, going in and making updates, making sure that they're checking for color contrast always when it comes to text over color or text over an image. Creating accessibility for the especially navigation menus, but any interactive elements, so like buttons, drop-down menus, like accordions, forms, things like that need to have keyboard accessibility. So there's some like HTML markup for that as well. Regularly reviewing this stuff, the more often your site changes, the more often you're adding content and pages, and if you're doing upgrades and things like that, just making sure you're maintaining those standards as it goes, because it doesn't really take that much. One page can throw you out of compliance. And to that point, making sure that anybody who's touching the site, anybody who's making edits to this, whether it's internal, it's an agency, it's a volunteer, that they're always kept up to date on best practices. And you guys, what we would have and what we would recommend would be, creating like a standard operating procedure for like everything has to be this way, right? Everything we do has to have this type of heading. Every time we create a button, it's going to be using this element. Every time we create a blog post, it has to have a title tag, an H1 tag, H2 tags and things like that, and have the right hierarchy so that people, when they're adding to your site, aren't taking you out of compliance. I'm going to go back to, we're going to see a couple questions I'm going to take that are relevant to this already in the chat. So someone asked, is there a site to run the test through? This says letter B's efficiency, but there's some sites that we'll share later on running some places you can run a test on your site that will run you through all accessibility and kind of give you some feedback on where it falls short, where you can make improvements, and even probably give you, a lot of times it'll even spit out like, here's how to make it more accessible. There was a question, somebody said WordPress messes up some of their headings. They're trying to figure out how to fix them. So that's probably a sizing and styling thing more so than like the actual, that's probably a sizing thing. The actual headings themselves would typically be how you are building that either in like a WYSIWYG editor or how it's pasted in from a tool like, somewhere like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. So it's equally as important to start there as well. So making sure that when you're building a document that needs to be copied and pasted into a website in the CMS, that the headings are correct there as well. And then, yeah, so some considerations on this stuff to those points, making sure that all your links have like descriptive text. So when you come to a website and you see someone that have a bunch of copy and it says click here, like that doesn't really help someone with a screen reader or an accessibility issue. It also doesn't help the common reader because they don't really know what click here is going to do. They might glean it from the context, but you would want to give more descriptive text like read our most recent thing here or get a consultation like that whole from Tap Network or something like that would be the best like example of like descriptive text or a label when you put a link on something. We always see people wanting to create a bunch of pages and everything opens links in new windows. That's like one of the main accessibility no-nos. Um, the only time you would do a new window would basically be if you had like a terms and conditions or something like that on a form or like on a checkout, like on a checkout screen or something like that, where you don't want to take them away from checkout. The reason you want to open it in the same window is if let's say I'm browsing this and I can't see what's opening on my computer and I click on a link, it's going to take me out to that new page. It's going to take me to that new page. It's not going to like open it in the background. Opens me in that new page. And now I can no longer navigate back. I can no longer go back through to what I was reading before. So like they'd have to go into the browser, find the other tab, and then go back through that content. You want to keep them within the ability to use that browser back button. Having a skip to content link, these are always hidden by screen readers, but like are always hidden from general people, but then typically, but you'd want to have it so the screen reader sees it. That's just something that when they're looking at a screen reader, they can see that so that they don't need to see your big hero header or a bunch of stuff, a bunch of content that doesn't really matter to them. It takes them right to the content. We talked about using the right headers. So content writing, this goes what I was saying just previously, when you're building a document in Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever it's in, or if you're building it right in the browser, making sure that you're using H1s, H2s. Improving grammar, that always helps. Spelling is always important. That helps with accessibility too. And as I mentioned, like it looks like it's in here twice, using descriptive links, so not just using click here, see below, to the left, things like that. Because it might, like, even if you just think about how stuff works on a mobile phone, like if you have a website, a lot of times responsive design would mean that like something on the left on a desktop would appear above it on a website. So if your website says fill in the form to the right, and then somebody's visiting that on mobile, and that form's also below, they're gonna be like, "Well," like someone's navigating that site, that doesn't make any sense. It's no longer on the right. So I would be like fill in the form on this page or something like that. To that point, so to that point, for mobile accessibility specifically, more changes there. So making sure that we would typically when we design sites, we design with like what we call mobile first. So like we design for mobile because a majority of visitors to sites now come from mobile devices. So we still create the desktop design and everything, but we do it with mobile in mind. So we make sure that like all elements and things like that will meet that mobile standard. So making sure that like we're following that responsive design principle. So the things I just talked about, left and right on desktop, top and bottom on mobile, images appearing the right size and resizing, making sure that sites that have a lot of interactivity like hovers and things like that don't work on mobile phone. If you think about it, there's no way to hover on your mobile phone really. You have to touch or press. So, removing those types of gestures, those hover effects and things like that, which would show you that this button's clickable or something like that. You want to make sure that that's obvious on a mobile phone. And then just testing on a bunch of things. So just because it works from your iPhone or just because it works from one phone doesn't mean it works across different screens. So looking at it on different size devices like iPads and different tablets and Android devices and iPhone devices, just to ensure that you're kind of covering all the bases with the different users. I see some more questions, so I'm going to stop here for 1 second and answer a few of those, and then we'll start in on alt text. The first one is about alt text. Can you talk about the quantity of alt text? Are there limits? What's the best practice? More of a title or full description? How necessary is to use H1, H2? I'll come back to that one. Okay, so I'll do the alt text. It's relevant to this page. So alt text, as I mentioned, is like that content that appears behind an image or an icon or a button or a video, that tells someone like what the real meaning is of that. So if they don't see the button on their screen, or if they don't see the image, or if a lot of times it's not just visually seeing these things. A lot of times, someone's on a mobile device, maybe in some rural community or something like that. They've got really slow connection, and the images won't load because they won't load over that connection. Well, you don't want that to change their experience and make the site inaccessible to them. So there's going to be alt text that comes up. So that the great picture of like, a volunteer at a fundraising event's not going to show them serving their community, but the alt text behind that would say like, volunteer in a community serving their community by fundraising at a local event, and make it descriptive. So the person knows what's supposed to be there. So it's contextual. So it should describe the image for screen reader users, but also, like I said, if it fails to load on the page. For if the image is being used as a link, you would add another level of that to describe what's in the image, and then also what happens when someone clicks that link. So where that link's taking them. So like it might be what I just said, like a volunteer serving the community, raising funds for an organization. Click here to be taken to our donation page. And that way the person that doesn't see that image clicks on that link and knows where they're going to be taken to. Images that have things like graphs, charts, something that's very complex that can't really be described in alt text. Like if you have a bunch of data points on a chart, that chart's on a page, you're not going to explain every single data point on there and how it's laid out. So it's important to we would recommend having that take a link to the text only description of that image or the data itself. And if the alt text is left blank, it's going to get skipped over by a screen reader. Those are things that the screen reader will identify as like a decorative image. So things like logos, icon graphics, things like that, you don't need to add alt text to. You can put logo as like so that someone reading that sees it, but it doesn't have if it doesn't have any real context in the page, you can actually skip the alt text. Here's some examples of that alt text we just talked about. So the first one, that's the correct and incorrect version. So this one on the right just says people working. One on the left would be people working and collaborating at computers on desks in our downtown Houston open floor plan office. So that would be, an organization that is saying this is what it looks like working for us and how it looks, how our space looks basically. Just talked about icons. So on the left, we have the ones where we don't need an icon like an alt text for a dollar sign or the scholarships thing, because we have contextual links below those, but also because it's not contextual to that page. And then same thing with the bar chart. So this one on the right says chart showing program enrollment, and then the one on the left gives you examples of like what that is. So bar chart showing enrollment over an 8-year period starting in 2006. Enrollment steadily increases each year. So that's a great example, but a very basic chart. Ones that are more complex, as they said, we want to have more like an external link to explaining what's there, or like the actual or data behind that. Color contrast, there's another question here about contrast. This will answer that as well. Contrast, it needs to be the bottom one's a good example of what does and doesn't pass. The top is what what that could look like. So we want contrast is important for us, for people with visual impairments, but it's also just important in general. Like when you see things that have low contrast or are hard to read for you, if you don't have a visual impairment, we also don't want to design sites that are that way just for the general audience. So it makes it harder and impossible for people to read. We want to aim for a minimum contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 for normal text, and then for 3 to 1 for large text. So you can see those examples above. So like This one, this high contrast in the top left is, oops, is what it is 21 to 1. So like the ratio of black to white is 21 to 1 versus to the right of that, you can't even probably read that a lot of times on this thing. That's basically 1 to 1. So it's almost the exact same color. And again, like we said, the 4.5 for normal text, 3.1 for large text. Large text is generally easier to read, so the number doesn't need to be as high. But we consistently try to aim for that 4.5 number. This one's a little bit more specific. Someone else had an ARIA, they pointed out ARIA in the chat, I believe, but something that's important to add, and I think this is in the new standards as well. But making sure that this is the markup on the back end. When you're, developers building this or making sure that you're building with a content management system that includes this. This is for screen readers and for like more than just screen reader devices, but like other common devices to add context to things that adds it's called accessible rich internet application language, basically, two different elements. There's a link here that has all the different states that should be used. The example here, you'll see it's like probably hard to see on this document but when you get this sent to you, you'll see it's adding context to it. So the first one just says like about, and then click here, and then the other one you'll see has an ARIA label that says about us, and that's just telling the screen reader that if they click here, it takes them to the about us page. So instead of having to say click here to be taken to the about page and making that one big link, you can still use click here, but you just want to make sure you add that label so that people can understand where they're trying to go. So as this thing says, like ARIA is a replacement basically for what I just said. So we don't want you to say click here if you can get away from that, but if you have to say click here, you can use an ARIA label. So use native HTML or like an attribute with what you're supposed to, if you can, and then you don't need the ARIA label. But if you don't have that, then you can use the ARIA label and add that ARIA tag to it. So another question for you: what motivates you the most to prioritize website accessibility in your organization? Is it, do you want to be socially responsible? Is it because you have a legal mandate, legal compliance? Is it for user experience, or is it impact and reach to drive more out of your audience? I hope it's all of the above. There we go, all the above. Yeah, user experience. As you said, I think you guys have probably started to see like the pattern. Like if you focus on user experience, you'll probably end up with a more accessible site. And that user experience will help you with impact and reach, making sure that you reach a wider audience. That user experience will help you in search engines as well. It'll help you stay compliant, and it'll help you meet your social responsibility. So the people that said all the above, you passed, but the user experience ones too. There's no wrong answer here. It's just obviously a preference. So some quick steps. We'll go through this, and then we'll have more questions at the end to get you your site accessible. The first one you guys have asked about, a grader, so we'll share that with you. You'll see a link, I think, in here. But making sure if you are building a new website, there's obviously the planning stage and making sure you're doing this from the beginning and follow the right steps. If you have an existing website, it's getting your website accessible now. Going through a great setting up like one of those graders or tools to monitor. So making sure you understand the case right now, monitoring and evaluating your site now and then regularly as things change, as the website changes, as the standards change, keeping up to date on that, staying up to date on those different standards, what they might be. Collecting user feedback is really important. We use different tools. We use a tool called UserSnap. We also just ask for feedback. But now that a lot of sites you go to see chatbots, like just asking a question, having a survey, what did you like about this? What would you change? Were you able to find what you needed? Was the content clear? Did you have any issues browsing the site? Things like that. Doesn't need to be like, did you find the site accessible? Like that might be a little bit too direct. You can ask that for sure, but like there's other ways to pose that question so you can actually get the information you want out of people. We look at accessibility as like an ongoing continuous improvement thing. Again, like commitment to continually learning. You're probably not going to nail it the first time. You're not going to, like, if there's, if it's out of 100, you're probably not going to get 100 out of 100. in the beginning, but like, striving for that and continuing to build towards that so your site can be fully accessible. Um, and then once you are that way, or if you're the person internally tasked with this, making sure that you're spreading the wealth, so to speak, and you're educating and training the rest of your organization, the people that are building your sites or writing your emails or building your content or designing things for you all, are following your accessibility standards and guidelines. Another quick win, so to speak, is having an accessibility statement. So this is just declaring what your commitment to accessibility and how a user can use your site. This does a few things. It tells you how accessible the site is. Like this would tell a user, we're committed to accessibility. Here's what we've done to make our site more accessible. And then you also say some things where it might fall apart too, not like fall short. So we understand our site is highly photo driven. It's a lot of user generated photos. So we don't have as much control over the alt text and things like that. So you might come into a situation where, there's alt text missing. We apologize for that. We strive for, this level of accessibility. Um, this can also give you protection against like litigation if someone does come after you and say, hey, your site's supposed to be compliant to this, blah, 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 blah. This can help guide you and guard you there. It's the resources we said. It also can be used sort of as like a tool for future improvement. So if you talk about the things that are accessible and aren't in that, that's a guide for you and your team to know like where you stand from an accessibility guideline. And the bonus to this is that it's extra SEO, it's extra content for you all. It also does help with the search engines too, to say, hey, this is their commitment to accessibility, and here's the things that they've done. Here's the slide that'll answer a lot of questions that have come up so far. So the different tools to get your site rated, to check your color contrast. There's the WebAIM tool, which is will evaluate your site. So if you go to that little link, it'll take you to the page. You can put your URL on there, you can put your page URL, your whole site, and it'll kind of evaluate your site for accessibility. There's the guidelines initiative page, which is just the guidelines, techniques, ways, things like that. So as you're planning, or if you need to better understand your report from the first link. Color contrast checker just kind of gives you that, what we just talked through, like the ability to test color contrast between two. So as you're designing things, make sure your designer has that. A lot of design systems like Figma and Adobe and things like that will actually include color contrast right in them, so that your designer should be working with that as long as you set that standard. There's a screen reader, which is also helpful to test your site on. So if you can use that screen reader to test your site, I think it says here it only works for Windows users. I think it still only works for Windows users. There's some other communities and tutorials, and then there's like an accessibility statement generator at the bottom, which will get you like a sort of a boilerplate version of this with your content in it. So with all that said, how we can help. We always want to kind of wrap this stuff up for Q&A on how we work with organizations in this way. As I said, if you go to TechSoup's website, you go to the services tab, you'll see website services, digital marketing. There's AI services in there now. Those are all us. They go back to our team. You can reach out to us through the chat. You can reach out to us through the email that you'll get. But for us to help guide you in the right direction, or even work with you and partner with you on getting your site more accessible, building a new site for you, and just helping your organization grow. You'll find a number of different product services offerings, things like that, throughout TechSoup for TAP. And a few of these that are kind of relevant to this conversation are hosting and security. So we do have a $124 a month full hosting security package for WordPress websites. That's going to get you managed hosting on our servers, set up you on Cloudflare. So they'll help protect you from like bot traffic, speed your site up a lot, access to your site. There's a bunch of plugins that like enterprise level plugins, agency plugins that we have access to, that we pass the cost through. Well, we carry the cost of, so that you don't have to pay for those different tools. There's accessibility plugins as part of those as well. So helps keep the cost down. You'll know the site's secure, it's managed by us, it's being kept up to date. And then if you get into a situation where you need troubleshooting, we'll be that first line of defense for support, and then we can help escalate that as we need to. We do have retainer packages as well. As we've evolved this over the last 15 years almost, working with nonprofit organizations, this has been the key to success with those organizations. So one-off projects just don't have the impact or typically seem to work. You know, if somebody comes and says, I want to give you a few $1,000s to fix our website. Sure, we might be able to do that. But as we mentioned, you know, this is an ongoing thing. So we'd like to partner with organizations to help them grow, help guide them, and, you know, continuously evolve with them. There's all different packages. These are some of the ones you'll see on here. The upgrade one, both these listed give you 10 hours of support. You can make as many requests as you want, but we'll cover those requests in the 10 hours or expand that into future months. The big difference between upgrade and premium is the premium one, you get like a strategic account manager. So you have an actual person. I mean, not that we won't have people, but on the upgrade one, but you'll have an account manager dedicated to you all. And they can also help escalate things to do like custom development work, ad management, content writing, and you'll have a 30-minute call with your account manager every month that will walk through what you all are working on, what the status is, how we're moving that stuff forward. Also do custom website development. We don't need to read through that. And then I'm gonna leave it open now for any questions you all have. We have plenty of time, I think, so. I'm gonna go through the Q&A first. In order. So someone asked, how do you feel with using a lot of red on the web page? That is a great question. That's probably a personal response from me. I don't love red, not my favorite color. It also depends on what your organization is. Like red has different meanings, right? So just being clear on what that is. Like if you're trying to drive people to donate, or if you have like a financial organization or bright and airy type of organization, you probably want to keep red to a minimum because red can kind of be like scary, shocking, things like that. If you have an organization, we worked at an organization called like the death penalty, deathpenalty.org. So all of them are like helping abolish the death penalty. Red works really well for that organization. So it really just depends on who your audience is and what message you're trying to get out there. Can have a big contrast, like deficiency depending on how it's used. So I would be wary of that. How necessary is it H1, H2, and H3 on every page with keywords in those headers? They can be together and separate. It's just the hierarchy of the page. Like every page should have a title. Every page should have an H1, tell you what the page is typically about. And then depending on what content's on the page, you would break it down from there. Again, that's just kind of like following the hierarchy, like sort of like a map for someone to follow. Like if you think of how an outline is created, if you ever build a page in like Word or Google Docs, like the H1 tags kind of build you that outline. If you think of how a table of contents is set up, H1 is essentially the chapter, right? Sorry, H1 is essentially the book title. H2s are essentially the chapters that go under that. Or if you have like sections of the book, you might be a little bit different, might be H1s that way. So it's very important. And then the keywords that will help you in SEO, like making sure that like the keyword you might be trying to optimize for is in the H1 or the H2, depending on like the level of keywords you're trying to go after. But more importantly is making sure that that keyword is used in context and is supported by other content on that page or content from other sources that come into your site for that keyword. We do screen reader audits for the popular JW screen readers, optimize the text contrast settings for color contrast, as well as label our meta tags for the proper alt text. Anything else we need to generally do to ensure 504 accessibility compliance? Sounds like you're doing a lot. I don't remember the difference. The new compliance, like standard is going to be 508, and that is what's getting pushed out through like education organizations, government organizations. There's a mandate for that this year. I don't have off the top of my head the difference between the two. I have a whole thing that we follow here internally on that though. But looking at yours, I think the ARIA tags and the like button and interactive elements are going to be the ones that would need to be, if you're not covering those already, would need to be covered. Any specific questions or concerns of Squarespace? Squarespace is hosting a website, hosting platform. No questions, no concerns. Squarespace is great. You know, Wix, these different platforms are all great. A lot of them have some of the stuff built in. So like depending on like, well, the ones where you can use different like plugins and third-party things might fall short, but um, you know, out of the box, a lot of times they will have support for the different levels of accessibility. Some of them also feature like an accessibility tool, which you can like add to the site, like it's a add-on or a plugin, and then you can click on like a user that needs that can click on that, and that'll help them resize things, change color contrast. A lot of times it'll change things to like black and white, um, change image sizes and things like that. So no real concern with that. Uh, for schools, how you handle complicated math worksheets or historical text scans. Scans are a nightmare. I don't have an answer for you, a solution for that. You know, being specific about what's in that scan is going to be probably the best you can do at this point. If you can use an OCR reader to turn that into text, that would be the next element of that. But if it's like a supporting thing and not like in the page, it has less of an impact on the actual accessibility. Um, we're in the process of revamping our site. Would you suggest making the content changes and then putting through the accessibility checklist? Would we better start with accessibility? The company that handles our website, we'd ask them to work on the accessibility. So there's two pieces, there's a couple pieces there. So the content needs to be developed so it's accessible, like the hierarchy is accessible. So if you think about things like we said, the headings, but also the text links and things like that, being contextual with like what that text link does is the content aspect of it. The design aspect is more the technical SEO aspect of it. So, well, the development aspect is technical. The design is like the visual aspect of it too. So it's kind of all three of those things need to work together. There's not a this first then that. It's the overall plan for how you're going to build the site, what you want it to look like, what content goes on the site, and then does it work with the different devices or for the different concerns. Can you put ARIA labels in Squarespace or does Squarespace do it for you? I think they have ARIA labels in, that's what I was saying. I think they have them in a lot of their built-in elements. And if not, then you can add, they have like key value pairs where you can add an ARIA label and then you can add the content for that label in those elements. Someone thank Jason. I'll make sure I'm reading that out loud so he feels thanked. Magenta better than red for websites, just kind of like that same answer from earlier. Like it could be depending on it's situational. Depends on what other colors you use throughout and what your organization is and who your audience would be. We are a school for students with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities. Any tips on accessibility? Yes and no. I don't like everybody's different. All those are different. Again, I think audio version, if you have any audio versions or um, audio on those sites would likely help that type of organization. It's becoming more and more prevalent, more and a lot easier to do. Like you can drop a ton of text into um, any number of these AI tools, and they will create an audio version for you. I've seen people turn basically whole blogs into podcasts, like whole blogs on their website into podcasts by just using some of these tools. And then now you have like the transcript version. You've already started the transcript basically. Now you're just building the audio or video version of that. That can help with that'll be helping you in a lot of ways, but like it gives you an option to have the audio version of that, which would limit some of that if that's helpful. And then that to that same point, you know, obviously, I mean, if there's no visual impairment there, you can also use some of the tools that will allow you to like you create like AI but versions of like a person that's giving that content so they can actually see someone speaking. Any tips or tricks for when a WordPress plugin defaults to the wrong heading levels? For example, our events plugin automatically makes upcoming events H4s on our homepage. They should be H3s. Tried to go into the plugin and tell it use a specific heading level instead of the default. It didn't seem to help. Yeah, it's good. So that's might be how the theme is set up, or how like there's different view things are set up. Sometimes there's little settings don't override there, so you might need to do some like code customization to to get that fixed. It's usually a pretty easy thing to do. If you want to reach out to us, we could take a quick look at that for you, I'm sure. And then somebody else said, thanks for the info. They didn't thank Jason, so I'm not going to thank Jason for them. They're just saying a general thank you. Anything else?
I've been doing my best to try to answer these on the side as well. Sorry. So I've been typing messages as you're answering them live. Hopefully it's helpful.
Can you recommend WordPress themes that are known to be compliant? So that's like there's not a specific there are that not the ones that I know that we use. We typically build one from it's called the Hello Elementor theme. And then we build that custom on a tool called Elementor. The thing about Elementor is it has an accessibility tool built in. It has accessibility testing kind of throughout each element that you can put in place, and it has the ability to add things like ARIA labels and tags and things like that on every element you build. So it allows you to build a much more accessible site. Um, with something like that, you can sort of build templates so that every time you recreate a button or something like that, it's always going to have the accessible tag or whatever built into it. So I would say those. I don't know a specific theme offhand though. Awesome. Well, thank you all. You guys have been very engaging. I did try to wrap up as quickly as I could. Sorry if I talked a little fast. There will be a recording of this. You can slow it down and it won't sound like I talked so fast. You probably get that either later today or tomorrow. And if you have any questions in the meantime, as we said, you can go to TechSoup site and reach out to us. You can go to tapnetwork.com and reach out to us directly, or you can just reach out to Jason through this chat. Beautiful.